Imagine this. It's 1944, deep in the mountains of New Hampshire. Inside the Grand Mount Washington Hotel, hundreds of delegates from 44 nations have gathered. The world has just survived two devastating wars, and now these leaders are about to make a decision that will quietly shape the global economy for the next century. On that day, the British pound, once the most powerful currency on earth, officially handed over its crown. The new king? The American dollar. However, this was not just a financial adjustment, it was part of a much larger pattern, a cycle that has repeated for over 500 years. This cycle involves empires rising, peaking, overspending, and ultimately declining. If history continues to repeat itself, as it often does, the US dollar may be closer to its twilight years than most people realize. The first empire of money, Portugal's era of discovery. Our story begins in the 14th century with a small nation that changed the world, Portugal. At that time, trade routes were collapsing. The Ottoman Empire had captured Constantinople, blocking Europe from the spice markets of Asia. Prices soared, and fortunes were lost overnight. But the Portuguese found a way around this challenge, literally. Through daring sea expeditions around Africa, they opened new trade routes to India and the Far East. For the first time, spices, gold, and silk flowed freely through Lisbon. The Portuguese real became the first widely accepted international currency. From Africa to Japan, merchants trusted Portuguese coins. For about 80 years, Portugal ruled the oceans and global commerce. However, success came at a cost. Maintaining forts and colonies across 4 continents drained their treasury. Rival nations like Spain and the Netherlands quickly caught up. Internal crises, royal disputes, and military expenses began to erode their empire. By the late 1500s, Portugal's power crumbled, and its currency faded with it. Next came Spain, whose power was built on mountains of silver. In 1545, Spanish explorers discovered one of the richest silver mines in history, the Mountain of Photos, located in what is now Bolivia. That single mountain produced nearly half of the world's silver for almost a century. With it, Spain minted its famous pieces of 8, coins that were so stable and valuable they became the first truly global currency. They were used everywhere, from the Americas to Asia, even in early American colonies. The Spanish dollar served as the real-world foundation of trade for over 100 years. However, a familiar pattern soon emerged. Spain became too rich, too quickly, and started spending recklessly. Endless wars, royal debts, and the costs associated with managing a vast empire led to 4 state bankruptcies in less than 50 years. The silver that once made Spain wealthy also caused prices to rise significantly. As prices quadrupled, the economy began to collapse when the mines started to dry up. By the mid-1600s, Spain's financial dominance had vanished, replaced by a smaller but more astute power, the Dutch Republic. While other empires chased after gold and silver, the Dutch did something revolutionary. They created trust. In the 1600s, Amsterdam emerged as the beating heart of world trade. Dutch merchants established the first stock exchange, the first central bank, and even modern insurance and investment systems. They introduced efficiency, stability, and innovation, attributes far more valuable than mere treasure. The Dutch guilder became the currency of international trade, with ships flying the Dutch flag navigating every sea to transport goods between Europe, Asia, and the Americas. For nearly 80 years, the Netherlands held dominance in the global financial system. However, as history shows, empires don't fall due to failure. They crumble under the weight of their own success. Wealth led to overconfidence, overreach, and ultimately war. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War with Britain drained their economy, and their trading giant, the Dutch East India Company, collapsed under the burden of debt and corruption. By the late 1700s, a new superpower was poised to emerge, Britain. Britain's rise was distinct. It was not driven by discovery or the pursuit of silver, but by machine. During the Industrial Revolution, Britain became the workshop of the world. Its factories, ships, and colonies fueled an empire that touched every corner of the globe. The British pound sterling became the new global reserve currency, dominating trade for over 200 years, longer than any previous currency. By the 1800s, London was at the center of the world's financial universe, accounting for more than 60% of international trade done in pounds. The gold standard ensured that the pound was both stable and trusted. At its peak, Britain ruled over 1/5 of the world's population and 1/4 of its land. The sun truly never set on the British Empire. Yet history has a way of repeating itself. 2 world wars exhausted Britain's resources and caused its national debt to skyrocket. By 1945, while the empire had emerged victorious, it was left financially broken, with debt soaring to over 270% of its GDP. Thus, the torch was passed once again, this time to America. The dollar takes the crown. In 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference, world leaders established a new global financial system. Every major currency would be tied to the American dollar, which in turn would be backed by gold. It was official. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. For the next 25 years, this system functioned effectively. The U.S. emerged from the war strong, productive, and wealthy, with the dollar backed by tangible gold that people trusted intensely. However, in 1971, that trust shifted dramatically. President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, effectively dismantling the gold standard and ushering in the era of fiat money, currency backed by confidence rather than physical assets. Surprisingly, the dollar did not collapse. Instead, it adapted, this time through oil. The petrodollar era. In the early 1970s, a significant oil crisis gripped the world. The U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. America would provide military protection, and in return, Saudi oil would only be sold in U.S. dollars. By 1975, all of PEC countries adopted the same practice, creating the petrodollar system. This arrangement significantly increased global demand for the dollar, as every nation needed oil and, consequently, U.S. dollars. This enabled the U.S. to print money and run deficits that would have devastated any other nation's economy. The dollar became virtually untouchable. By the year 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in U.S. dollars. However, history shows that dominance does not last forever. Today, we are beginning to notice warning signs similar to those that preceded the decline of previous reserve currencies. The share of global reserves held in U.S. dollars has fallen from 70% to under 58%. Foreign countries are holding fewer U.S. Treasury bonds than ever before, and international alliances are evolving. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are expanding rapidly. They have welcomed new members such as Egypt, Iran, and the UAE. Together, they are constructing a new financial network that bypasses the dollar entirely, utilizing digital currencies and alternative payment systems. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $36 trillion, approximately 124% of its GDP. This scenario may seem familiar. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and Britain all followed a similar trajectory: innovation, expansion, debt, decline. The 4 stages of a reserve currency. A study of 500 years of history reveals that every global currency, regardless of the nation, undergoes the same 4 stages. Rise. A nation leads through innovation. Portugal with navigation, Spain with silver, the Dutch with finance, Britain with industry, and the U.S. with technology and post-war manufacturing. Peak. During this stage, a currency dominates global trade, accounting for more than 60% of international transactions. Confidence is high, wealth flows easily, and the empire feels invincible. Overextension. Here, the cracks begin to appear. Wars, debt, political infighting, and declining productivity put pressure on the system. Military spending increases, innovation slows, and the cost of maintaining global power becomes overwhelming. Decline. Trust in the currency begins to wane. Nations start to seek alternatives, and confidence erodes gradually. Then suddenly, a new power rises, and the cycle begins anew. The U.S. dollar is currently 81 years into its cycle, which is comparable to the lifespan of previous global reserve currencies before their transitions. What happens next? The decline of reserve currencies doesn't occur overnight. Britain's decline spanned several decades. The U.S. was economically stronger long before the dollar officially replaced the pound. If history repeats itself, a slow shift may already be underway toward a multipolar world where multiple currencies share global influence rather than just one. The yuan, digital currencies, and regional payment networks are on the rise. Oil trade agreements are evolving, and for the first time in 80 years, the world is quietly asking what comes after the dollar. Lessons from 500 years of money and power. Every empire believed it was unique and could escape the cycle. Yet, history plays no favorites. Portugal was confident its sea routes would last forever. Spain believed its silver would never run out. Britain trusted its empire would remain strong. The US was sure its dollar would always be king. However, the same forces, debt, overreach, and change, eventually brought them down. The real question is not whether the dollar will lose its dominance, but how, slowly or suddenly. Will a single nation emerge as the leader, or will we enter a new era where multiple currencies share power? The cycle continues. Although history doesn't repeat itself exactly, it always follows familiar patterns. Empires rise, currencies dominate, and eventually they fade into obscurity. The world's financial landscape is shifting once again, and regardless of whether this transformation takes 10 years or 50, it is already underway. The US dollar is now in the later stage of its cycle, just as Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and Britain once were. The only remaining question is, who will wear the crown next? If you found this analysis insightful, please like, share, and subscribe. Understanding history is not just about the past. It's about recognizing the patterns that will shape our future.